Listen, my friend, let me take you on a journey back in time. Imagine with me, Egypt, thousands of years ago, was divided into two halves, north and south, each with its own king. Until one man came along, named Menes. This man did something no one before him had been able to do. He united all of Egypt, making it one country. From that moment, the world changed. Egypt became strong. It had an army and a system, and the Nile flooded every year, making the land green and the crops filled the country. People lived in prosperity and comfort, as if the world had smiled upon the Egyptians. But the pharaohs, no, they weren't like everyone else. They wanted something greater than rule. They wanted immortality, to live on in the memory of time even after they died. And this is where the story began. The small tombs they used to build their kings grew and became huge and transformed into tall mastaba. And then the crazy idea came. Why not build a monument that would stand for thousands of years? And here emerged the ultimate form, the pyramids. But let's compare. How was the world at the time? In Iraq, for example, they were still writing their first letters on clay tablets. In the Indus Valley, they lived in simple brick cities. And in China, the small villages around the Yellow River. And in Europe, they were collecting stones, like Stonehenge, but without writing or a real civilization. While the whole world was still learning to live, the Egyptians were thinking about how to immortalize themselves and remain eternal. The pyramids, my friend, were not just tombs. This was a message to the whole world. We are here, and we will remain here, even after we die.
After King Menes united Upper and Lower Egypt, the country entered a new era filled with strength and stability. But the kings weren't just thinking about ruling. They had a greater goal: how to immortalize themselves and live forever. From pits to mastabas, initially kings were buried in pits underground, with tools, food, and utensils placed with them. All this was to provide them with provisions for their journey to the afterlife. Over time, the Egyptians invented something new, the mastaba, a rectangular mud brick building above ground. It was as if they were saying, the king is not an ordinary person. He has a higher status. End of the first dynasty. The first dynasty, founded by Menes, enjoyed a good period, but with its last king, the world began to erode. Struggles over power increased, and the prestige of the throne weakened. Their tombs in Abydos were slightly larger than those before them, but still underground. The kings were buried surrounded by their entourage and soldiers, evidence that the concept of the grand royal tomb had begun to evolve. The second dynasty, a period of turmoil and transition. With the beginning of the third dynasty, King Djoser arrived. A king with an ambition to leave behind an unforgettable legacy. And here appeared Imhotep, the brilliant minister, a man who was a doctor, an engineer, and an astronomer, one of the greatest minds in history. Imhotep looked at the mastaba and said, "Why should we leave it one story? Why not build it stacked on top of each other, like a ladder to heaven?" And indeed, he built the first pyramid in history, the Step Pyramid of Saqqara. What was not just a tomb, the ancient Egyptians saw it as a ladder to immortality, the king's road to reach the gods and live forever. Imagine, and here we are building the first pyramid. In Sumer, present-day Iraq, they built ziggurats, huge temples to the gods, not tombs for kings. In the Indus Valley, present-day India and Pakistan, cities were planned and had sewage systems, but there were no buildings for eternity like in Egypt. In China, people still live around the Yellow River in simple villages. And in Europe, communities are small. They built stone circles like Stonehenge, which was built centuries after the Pyramid of Djoser. The bottom line: while the world was still trying to organize itself, the Egyptians were ahead by leaps and bounds. From an underground pit to a mastaba to the first pyramid in history. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning that would pave the way for the greatest architectural achievement known to mankind: the Pyramids of Giza.
After the Egyptians learned the concept of mastabas, and after Djoser built the first step pyramid at Saqqara, the third dynasty reached a new peak. But by the end of its reign, the kings who came after Djoser were not as powerful as he was. The country entered a period of turmoil, and this opened the door for a new dynasty to emerge, the Fourth Dynasty. This was known as the Golden Age of the Pyramids. Its first king, King Khufu. Khufu decided to do something that would live on forever. He built the Great Pyramid, which stands defying time to this day. Its original height was approximately 146 meters, taller than any building in the world until the advent of modern skyscrapers. Millions of stones were assembled, some blocks weighing tens of tons. People in the past believed that slaves were tortured and died to build the pyramid, but new excavations have revealed otherwise. They found entire residential cities next to the pyramids, houses, bakeries, workshops, and even medical facilities. This means that the pyramid builders were skilled workers, living in a highly organized system, as if it were an entire city serving a massive royal project. After Khufu came his son Khafre. He built the second pyramid, which still stands with its steep sides and has preserved its outer cladding better than the rest of the pyramids. But Khafre wasn't satisfied with that. He also left us the greatest mystery on the Giza Plateau, the Great Sphinx. A colossal statue with the body of a lion and the head of a human, standing as a guardian of the plateau for thousands of years. Who does it represent? Is it Khafre himself? Or a symbol of the sun god? The secret has yet to be revealed. After Khafre came Menkaure. He built the third pyramid, smaller than the two that preceded it, but its beauty and precision were truly remarkable. It's as if he's saying, it's not size that makes immortal, but mastery and artistry. But, as everything has a beginning, it also has an end. The Fourth Dynasty didn't remain this powerful for long. The kings who came after Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure were weaker. There were struggles over the throne, and the administrative and economic system was affected. With time, the Fourth Dynasty ended, and after it began the Fifth Dynasty, which focused more on temples and religion than on massive pyramids. What we must remember is that the pyramids are not just tombs. This is a clear message from the ancient Egyptians. Death wasn't the end. Death was a new beginning. And the pyramids were the bridge, a bridge between this world and the afterlife. And that's why to this day, the pyramids are not just stones. The pyramids are an idea, a civilization, and immortality.
Egypt at this time had attained tremendous economic power. The Nile provided abundant agriculture. The land yielded enough crops to sustain the population and more. And this led the Egyptians to turn to trade. Egyptian merchants brought them gold from Nubia, cedar wood from Lebanon, and incense from the land of Punt, far to the south. In other words, Egypt not only thrived on its own wealth, it was the heart of a trade network between many civilizations. At the same time, the people played a role. The farmer worked his land, and when the flood came and there was no agriculture, they went and participated in the construction of pyramids and temples. The priests were the maestro. Everything was ritualized and religious, and they proclaimed to the people that the pyramid was the eternal home of the king. But let's look at the world around us at that time. In Mesopotamia, present-day Iraq, large cities began to emerge, such as Ur and Uruk, and cuneiform writing began to spread. In the Indus Valley, present-day Pakistan and India, villages were transforming into organized cities with markets and mud brick houses. In Europe, people were still building mysterious stone monuments like Stonehenge in England. In China, agricultural societies began to grow and transform into primitive civilizations. Imagine an Egyptian farmer planting or helping build a pyramid. At the same time, someone in Iraq was developing the first forms of writing. Someone in Europe was stacking huge boulders, and someone in India was planning his city. Egypt wasn't just part of this world. No, it was at the forefront.
And we have Khufu lifting huge stones and building the Great Pyramid. The world around him didn't stand still. In Mesopotamia, Sargon of Akkad emerged and established the first empire in history. And they wrote laws and transactions on clay tablets with nails. And in India, the Indus Valley civilization was at its peak. Cities with straight streets and organized sewage systems, meaning they were living in an unprecedented state of progress for their time. As for Europe, it was still the beginning of Bronze Age societies, and they continued to build Stonehenge, which was designed as a mysterious astronomical temple. And in China, the Jia dynasty began, which people call the first legendary dynasty there. But be careful, despite all this progress, no one but the Egyptians have been able to build something that remains standing to this day. The pyramid still speaks volumes about the genius of the pharaohs 4,500 years later. And if you want to know more about the secrets of ancient Egypt and the stories of the pharaohs, subscribe to the channel and follow the series.
Look, my friend, the ancient Egyptians didn't see the king as just an ordinary human being. No, they saw him as a god living on earth. And when he died, he ascended to heaven with Ra, the sun god. That's why the pyramids were built. They weren't just huge tombs. No, they were a means by which the king could communicate with the gods. On the walls of the tombs were found the pyramid texts, the oldest religious writings in history. They all tell of how the king's soul would transform into a star in the sky and live forever. The ancient Egyptians saw death not as the end, but as the beginning of another life, eternal life. That's why the idea of immortality became the heart of their entire civilization. From the step pyramid of Djoser in Saqqara to the Great Pyramids of Giza, the pharaohs left behind the largest and most magnificent architectural monuments humanity has ever seen. But keep in mind, at the same time that Egypt was building the pyramids, major movements were taking place in other countries. In Iraq, for example, the Akkadian Empire was consolidated by Sargon of Akkad, and this was the first empire in history. In India, the Indus Valley civilization was at its peak. Organized cities with straight streets and sewers. And in Europe, people were still building Stonehenge, the giant stones whose secret no one knows to this day. That is, the whole world was taking shape, but the pyramids remained the landmark that placed Egypt at the forefront. However, after the glory of the Fourth Dynasty, and after Khufu and Khafra and Menkaura built the pyramids, which became a miracle of the world, problems began to appear. The Nile wasn't flooding like it used to. Famine struck the country. Priests and kings engaged in power struggles. And over time, the old kingdom collapsed. Egypt entered a period people call the Dark Age, or the First Era of Decline. In the next episode, we'll find out, why did the Pyramids era collapse? And what happened next?